In over 100 separate incidents, toddlers were kicked, yanked, and pushed by their own caretaker at a Texas daycare. And now, Catherine Guziejka, the woman at the center of this horrifying case, has finally been sentenced. What did the judge decide? What does it mean for these families? We're going to break it all down with Russell Button, a trial attorney and child injury expert, someone who knows cases like this inside and out. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. By the way, I have to ask, have you ever left a meeting and thought, what did we just talk about for the last 30 minutes, right? You gotta see my Claude No Pen. This will change everything, okay? This tiny AI-powered device is more than just a recorder. It is a hands-free AI secretary that you can carry with you every day. Whether it's meetings, interviews, brainstorms, the No Pen doesn't just catch everything. It also identifies key points, it expands into summaries, and it delivers role-specific action items to keep your whole team aligned. And the best feature, arguably, is Ask Claude. Because instead of wading through hours of meeting notes, you can ask it to hunt for answers. Like, hey Claude, what hot trials did we talk about covering next year? And Claude will pull that conversation. So if you're over messy notes, it is time to try Claude No Pen. Right now, you can get 20% off with code SIDEBAR20. Just click the link below or scan the QR code. We have been following this disturbing daycare case for months now. This is a shocking situation out of Texas where this daycare worker, Catherine Guziejka, was caught on security cameras repeatedly attacking toddlers in her care. And we are talking more than 100 separate horrifying incidents of abuse. Kicking kids in the back, including under 2 years old, standing on their hands, yanking them around while they slept, all happening quietly in a room full of children. But now we have a major new development, okay? A judge has officially handed down Guziejka's sentence, and she is going away for a long time. We're going to get into what happened, because what has changed since we last covered this is a lot, and what this new twist, what this new update means moving forward. Now, this all starts at a small daycare in Lindale, Texas. It's called the Pumpkin Doodles Daycare. 45-year-old Catherine Guziejka had been working there since September of 2023. This is according to the owner at the time. She passed the background check, she had the training, she looked like the kind of employee that you would trust with toddlers. And for months, nobody had any idea what was happening inside that room. But then you go to October of 2024, and this is where everything blows open. Why? According to the arrest affidavit that was reviewed by local media, a coworker just happened to be reviewing the daycare surveillance footage when she saw something so shocking, she rewound the clip to make sure she saw what she thought she was seeing. A 2-year-old boy sitting calmly on the floor, and the defendant walking up behind him and kicking him hard, right in the small of his back. So the coworker alerts the boy's father, who immediately goes straight to the Smith County Sheriff's Office to file a report. This is October 23rd, 2024. And from there, deputies, they head to the daycare, they start reviewing the footage themselves, and that is when they realize that this wasn't an isolated incident, not even close. Smith County Sheriff Larry Smith later explained just how bad it was in an interview with local affiliate KLTV, telling the outlet, quote, "There was over 100 instances of what was observed to be abuse. More than 100. And it wasn't chaos, it wasn't kids running around, it wasn't a stressful moment, not that that would justify it in any way. But just to make it even worse, according to prosecutors, these toddlers were just sitting, quiet, existing, and Guziejka walked over and hurt them. Authorities said the pattern was disturbingly consistent. She would walk up behind these toddlers, 2, 3, 4 years old, and kick them in the back with her right foot, again and again. Investigators also said she stood on the kids' hands, dragged sleeping toddlers out of their naps by one arm, aggressively repositioned them, forced their faces toward the wall during diaper changes, and all of this was apparently captured on video. Now, the daycare owner at the time, Melanie Dawn Law, told KLTV that she reviewed the footage herself. She confirmed to deputies that she had seen abuse going all the way back to July of 2024, months of it, more than 100 incidents. So she fires Guziejka immediately, turns over every second of relevant footage to law enforcement, and by the time deputies were done reviewing just the initial batch of surveillance footage, they had enough to move quickly. They charged Guziejka with 6 counts of injury to a child. On October 30th, 2024, an arrest warrant was signed. Guziejka was booked into the Smith County Jail on a $450,000 bond, and this is where she remained, according to local affiliate CBS 19. And that's where the case stood. Dozens upon dozens of documented incidents, 6 formal charges, and a mountain of video evidence that investigators were still sorting through. And that is the point where things eventually moved into the courtroom. All right, so as I mentioned, I want to bring on a special guest right now. I want to bring on trial attorney, child injury attorney, a specialist, unfortunately, in this area. There's just a lot of these episodes that happen. Russell Button, thanks so much for taking the time. Good to see you. I want to start with this part before we get into how it concluded and the sentence and what it means. Cases like this, where you have a daycare worker who is accused of over 100 separate acts of abuse. How do investigators even begin to build a case like this? How does a lawyer even begin to build a case in the civil case or in the criminal case, in the criminal context?
Well, the first thing that happens in these cases is you have to have an adult step up to the plate and report it, because investigations can't start. Most of these children in these daycares, they can't talk, or when they communicate, it's very limited. So you're looking for signs of abuse in these children in these cases. You're going to be looking for changes in behavior. But many times it starts with some adult actually taking it upon themselves to see something and then say something. And that's when those investigations start. What they go through, what they look at here, thankfully, there was video camera. And there was video surveillance, and these investigators are able to go back in time and look at all of the stuff that's at least caught on camera. What's alarming in our daycare and child injury work that we see in these cases all the time is these things have been going on for weeks and months, and nobody saw it. Nobody did anything. And it's a severe lack of supervision in these cases. And so in the civil case, we're able to get the reports that the DA and the criminal investigators had. We're able to get the state investigation reports, and we're also able to conduct our own independent investigation on what that daycare knew or should have known throughout that entire time period. And whether that's documentation about a parent complaining about bruises and how did these appear mysteriously, or a child not wanting to go to daycare and being extremely withdrawn, and they get all these excuses, that adds up over time. And so we're able to piece a lot of those things together. And in a case like this, it's heart-wrenching. It's disturbing that it happened for such a long period of time to so many different children. So the investigations on these cases, while it seems simple on the outside, it is very intense. It is very thorough. And I'm glad that the investigators here took their time and found at least everything that was caught on camera.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. If it wasn't for that daycare worker who was reviewing the footage, if it wasn't for the daycare owner who turns over everything to law enforcement coming, checking everything out, I mean, you don't know when it would have been detected. And is that a situation where the footage should be reviewed more regularly? Is that something that needs to happen?
Absolutely. We say this time and time again. Since we've been doing these cases as daycare and child injury lawyers all over Texas, all over the country, it is our one big pain point in these daycares is if you have the surveillance, if you've taken the time to put cameras in place, you need to be monitoring them. You need to be watching them. It's as simple as that. And too many times they put them up and the daycare workers know that they're not being watched. And what this case specifically shows me and tells me with regard to that is it's a severe lack of supervision because the caregiver didn't feel like they were ever going to be caught. They had no concern about doing this, knowing the cameras are right there. And we see that time and time again. I mean, it could be a physical abuse case, a sexual abuse case, a verbal abuse case. It could be just simply not watching kids and being on their iPad and their cell phones. And we're seeing it on camera. And the reason why they're not concerned about it is because they know that nobody's watching those cameras. So it is our one big thing in these cases that when they have cameras, make sure they're covering actual areas and make sure somebody's watching them. Period. End of story.
So let me get into this a little bit more. I want to move into what happened once this case got into the courtroom, because that's when things escalated quickly. Because after months of investigators reviewing hours and hours of daycare surveillance video documenting dozens of incidents with multiple toddlers, Catherine Guziejka ultimately entered a guilty plea to multiple counts of injury to a child. So Russell, I want to bring you back in here because There is a lot to unpack when a defendant is charged with child abuse, decides to plead guilty rather than go to trial, okay? I want you to take a listen to that formal plea per KLTV.
You swear affirm testimony you will give is the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. And 475-004625 to be charged of injury to a child is led by the state and indictment against you. To that matter, how do you plead guilty or not guilty? And of course, at the same time, the admonishments will be the same.
So from your perspective, why would she do this? Why would a defendant in a case like this choose to plead guilty instead of letting a jury decide? When, look, I believe it was reported a trial was right around the corner, by the way.
Because they know that they're going to be found guilty, plain and simple. You just don't do this to kids. It doesn't matter what's going on. You don't kick, you don't assault, you don't abuse children. Plain and simple. We all take that very seriously. It is very serious in our daily work as daycare and child injury lawyers. Parents care about that. They pay a lot of money for these daycares to protect their kids while they're at work. That is who our clients are. And in this specific case, she wanted to probably try and wait, try to fight it, try to see if she could get off on a technicality. And thank God she didn't. And when you have to know that you're going to face a jury, that's when the truth is going to prevail. And here it did by a guilty plea. Now, everybody thankfully knew a lot because this has gotten a lot of publicity before that. But I'm very thankful that at the very least she pled guilty and admitted her stuff, but it still doesn't make it right that it was allowed to go on for so long. And the plea itself, it just tells you that she knew that she did this and she was going to be found guilty by a jury of her peers.
What typically would be a defense?
There wasn't one here. Plain and simple. I mean, when you have any sort of assault or abuse type of situation, take two adults, the only thing that you can say is self-defense, right? Or provocation. They provoked you, but these are little kids. These are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, at a daycare setting on a typical basis, not including the summer or after school stuff. You're talking little kids that can barely communicate for themselves or learning how to walk or trying to be potty trained. I mean, it's ridiculous to think that there ever would be a defense. So when she knew she wasn't going to get off on a technicality and they had everything put on video in the bag, she knew that her only option was either getting found guilty by the jury or pleading guilty herself. And she chose the easier route there.
And look, you save the time, aside from the time and expense of a trial, you save a jury having to review all this incredibly disturbing footage day in and day out. So here's what happens. This is what I want to talk about. After the guilty plea, everything shifted to the sentencing hearing. And this is where the courtroom really felt the weight of what happened, because here's the moment the sentence was handed down. This is per KLTV.
I'll assess her sentence in each one at 10 years confinement.
So in the end, Catherine Guziejka, after all of that, was sentenced to 10 years in prison, with the judge ruling that her sentences for each charge would be served concurrently. Now, Russell, 10 years is a long time. Some might say, well, why weren't some of them stacked on one after the other? Why did it serve the sentences at the same time? Why not consecutively? Thoughts?
I hear, we see this all the time. And I've said this time and time again on all these types of media and podcasts with regard to criminal charges for things that people do to kids at daycare. To me, it is under-prosecuted, it is underreported, and the penalties are far too weak, to be honest with you. So we feel very strongly, just like the judge here, that giving a sentence, giving the maximum sentence is the best case scenario here. But with regard to concurrent versus consecutively, meaning serving them all at one time or serving them one after another, that is what the law allows, that they can be served concurrently. Again, we believe that if you've made the decision, the deliberate choice to do this to not just one child, but several different children over a long period of time, then you deserve to serve each of those sentences separately. But is 10 years a long time? For her, she might say that. To the parents who had their children abused, I don't know that they would. I don't know that they would agree with that.
Do you think the guilty plea plays an outcome in sentencing?
You know, as far as the guilty plea playing an outcome in the sentencing, I would say maybe sometimes. I think that literally just depends on if it's an authentic guilty plea to own up to something as opposed to just trying to get out easy. And a lot of that comes with how long you drug this out, and the judge that's sitting there deciding your sentencing, and the evidence in the case. Thankfully, we generally, when you have something very serious, we want to make sure that that evidence gets in front of the judge, and that way the sentence actually matches the crime. And so the guilty plea, does it help with the sentencing? I hope it doesn't, because I hope it doesn't let them off easy for what they've actually done and what they're owning up to. I think sometimes it does, but I hope that the judges that are making those decisions aren't just taking a guilty plea and giving them a lesser sentence.
And I think it should be noted that none of the children suffered life-threatening injuries. Why do I say that? Not to take away from what she did, but that if they did, her charges could have been, much greater. We could have been talking an even greater sentence. But also, let's talk about the civil arena, okay? Because in terms of potential civil liability, a lawsuit, how could a sentencing like this, how could an outcome in the criminal context like this, how does that influence the family or the families if they pursue claims for damages?
So in every daycare and child injury case, there's three buckets. There's the state administration, their investigation and findings. In all these cases, just like there was done here, there is a criminal bucket for actual penal code charges, penal code crimes, just like here. And then there is the civil arena, and that's the negligence and gross negligence, where the system failed. And that's really what this helps for. You have a bad actor, but bad people are always going to be in our community. They're all over the world. They've been around for decades and decades and decades and centuries. What has to be done by these daycares, and where they fail and where the civil arena kicks in, is when the system doesn't protect the children. And when you don't follow the safety systems that these daycares have. Yes, we have minimum standards put out there by the state, but they're just that. They're just minimums. And you have to take it upon yourself as the owner, as the director, as fellow caregivers, to actually follow the system, put different things into place, and make sure that these bad apples don't get in the door. And if they do, they don't stay very long. And when you see something that might even lead to something that's bad, you need to address it and get them out the door, these bad apples. That was not done here. And that's how something like this can really help in the civil arena, because we gather all the evidence from every agency in all of our daycare and child injury cases. Anybody that talked to somebody, reviewed a document, sent an email, talk to a witness, we get names of former parents and former employees. We interview everybody. And so these criminal things really help, because they'll hold on to that evidence until there is a guilty plea or a conviction. And until all appeals are exhausted, then we're able to get that information. And so that's how it really helps in the civil cases. We get to use these other investigations plus our own independent one to really bring forth and get out there what failed in that system. Why was this even allowed to happen? Because it never should have.
But to be clear, when there are episodes of abuse at a daycare facility, even something like this, it's not automatic that the daycare is responsible or did something wrong. There are things that, even if the proper protocols are put in place, the person appears to be trained, meets the qualifications, or is it just a number? Like when you say 100 episodes, you can't excuse that. Or do you say, look, there are times, there are circumstances where, yes, it shouldn't have happened, but it doesn't mean the daycare is responsible because they did everything they were supposed to do. I mean, how do we balance that?
Each case is different. Each situation is different. When we see these cases, and and we take them one off on their own, okay? When we see a repeat history by a daycare that they are failing to run background checks, they're failing to look at CPR certifications, they have prior abuse, neglect, maybe by a different caregiver on their prior violation history. You know, when we see these things and they're deficient in training, it leads us to believe, and it tells us that there's a problem in the system before this bad apple ever got there. So can there be a situation where somebody does something really small and then they don't get stopped and it turns into something bigger? That's exactly what happened here. When you see something, no matter what it is, in Texas, they are mandatory reporters, all the adults at these daycares and schools. They are mandatory reporters of suspected abuse. It doesn't mean that it has to, you have to actually know that it was abuse. You got to let the people come in and investigate that. And that's where we see people go really wrong, is they say, oh, that kid wasn't necessarily hurt, or you know what, it didn't leave a bruise. We've heard that before. We've seen it where the kid didn't react negatively. So you know what, we're not going to investigate that. We're not going to report it. Those are the types of things that I'm talking about, that when they are allowed to go on, then something really bad does end up happening and a kid pays the consequences, unfortunately. So are there things that can happen where you have somebody that's qualified on their face, they go through the initial training and they get into a daycare and in theory they're okay? Sure, absolutely. But you can't just stop there. You have to be monitoring them daily. And that's where the systems really fail in the civil arena, is you as the daycare owner and director are the ones that's responsible for making sure that these kids are safe on a day-to-day basis, because things change. And that didn't happen here, and we see that across the board in our daycare cases.
Well, that's a good point. Look, thankfully, I mean, it's hard to even predict what these kids are going to be going through as they continue their lives and the impact this had. But I will just say, thankfully, she was stopped at some point, you know, wasn't allowed to continue even further because the consequences could have been even more dire. And now she's going to pay the price. Russell Button, thank you so much for coming on, for breaking it down with us. And again, thank you for the great work that you do at the Button Law Firm.
Thank you for having us, Jesse. Appreciate it.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can follow me on X or Instagram. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.